Thank you, John. It's great to see you. You know, if I had any doubt of our success this year, I don't have it anymore, because looking around this room and seeing this great crowd, it's a wonderful sign of our enthusiasm and our commitment to win in 2018. You know, I can recall being here a few years ago when we were more in national power, obviously national power than we are now. And we had many issues to talk about. And oftentimes those issues caused us to disagree on various things. But I don't think there's any disagreement now, because I think we recognize what's happened to our country. Like most of you, I woke up on the morning after the 2016 presidential election in disbelief. Not just that Hillary Clinton had failed to win, but more that the country had actually elected Donald Trump. On Tuesday night, he's going to report to us and the country on the State of the Union. But I think we already know what the State of the Union is. It's clearly a mess. Clearly this past year has demonstrated outrage after outrage, almost to the point of disbelief, whether you want to talk about the attempt to undo the health care policies of the country that has only been partially successful due to their incompetence in Congress, or you want to talk about the immigration issues, that they've clearly persecuted people who've done nothing wrong except work, or you want to talk about their abandonment of public education. We could go on and on and on. Perhaps the most notable thing that they're going to say they achieved, and I'm sure we'll hear this on Tuesday night, is that they got their tax cut bill through. Now, as it happened, just as I was coming down here, I was listening to the radio, and they just completed a survey of all the corporations that got this huge windfall. So big, they can't even figure it out. Their accountants at most of the multinational corporations haven't yet figured out how much money they're going to make out of this. But the survey was how many of these companies were actually going to give some benefit to their employees. And perhaps you've heard some of them say, oh, we're giving them a $1,000 bonus. Yippee! A $1,000 bonus when you make $1 billion. An apple for an orchard any day, right? And I know this is apple country, so you understand. No, 80% are not going to do anything, and they're not even going to raise wages. So I guess that's the State of the Union. The State of the Union is the rich have gotten richer because they've been stealing from the Treasury, destabilizing the country in the process, and yet the middle class and the poor get nothing. The poor get less sometimes. So I think we have a great case having been made to do well in 2018. And I think while some of us have seen over the past year, I've had an opportunity during the past year to speak to many Democratic groups, and as I said, it began in disbelief, but also there was some degree of questioning, self-questioning. How did it happen? What did we do? Policy issues. But we shouldn't do that. We should really focus on what we stand for. Because there's one thing I know. As I said, I not only have been doing this for my entire adult life, but in particular I've been around this past year. As I said, this sort of disbelief morphed into some degree of questioning, self-questioning. But we shouldn't question. The common denominator, though, in all the Democratic groups that I've spoken to is this. When you look around the room at this group or any Democratic group, you see that we are the people of this country, the diversity that we represent, the different points of view, the common commitment to justice. And when you think back about all the major policy decisions that our country has made, whether it be civil rights or economic advancement or protecting health care or Social Security or advancing public education, it's us, it's the Democratic Party that's done that. And that's our message. That's our message to the wayward, the people who strayed perhaps in 2016, the people who believed that somehow they were going to get some magic benefit out of electing a guy that never did anything except for himself. And that's a mistake. But it's not the time to say, oh, you made a mistake. It's the time to say, come and join us. Let's recapture our country. Let's get back on the right road. Let's start thinking about the things that all the things that are so important. We have that message, and we have that strength. We need to make sure we go out and speak to that. And it's here in Massachusetts, you know, it's kind of almost a split personality. On the one hand, everyone's proud of the fact that only 34% of the state voted for Trump, although that's a little deceiving because in some places he did better than that. You know, he only got 6% in Cambridge, so that kind of brought down his average. But the other thing is we have this bonhomie attitude towards Baker, the governor. And, oh, he's such a good guy. Well, not really. Not really. I had to sit there. I had to sit there the other night on the platform while he gave his speech, and he droned on about all the wonderful things he's done and stabilized this and that. And I was sitting next to the Senate President Harry Chandler, and because we're looking at the teleprompter so we can tell when he made mistakes. But in any case, he came up with some figure, I think it was 83 million for, I think it was either education or healthcare, and Harriet says to me, that's nothing. She whispered to me, that's nothing. And it's true. I mean, it's all smoke and mirrors. It's all this good feeling. We have some great candidates, and we have a great message, and we need to make sure we go out and do that. I'm happy, as I said, to be here. I want to speak briefly about my office and what I've done and what I want to continue to do. I'm very proud of the record that we've had in Massachusetts that I've had. John mentioned deeds, and that's great. But perhaps the most important thing, there's a couple of things that I want to speak to. One is elections. You know, we've had, over the last couple of cycles, first of all, a record turnout. Over 3 million people voted in the last presidential election, more than 3 million, and more than 3 million in the previous one. The record keeps going up and up and up. We have over 4 million eligible people to vote. And that's, when you consider our state population, is a pretty high number. We've done all sorts of things to make it easy. You can register online. The early voting situation that John mentioned was a tremendous success. It was challenging, because as all of you know, it's town by town, city by city, and everyone likes to do it a little differently, and the legislature gave them a lot of latitude. But I'm very grateful to the city and town clerks, because despite whatever misgivings they had about early voting, and some of them did, some of our Republican clerks in particular weren't thrilled about it, but we worked it out. We had over 1 million people vote early. 1 million people. And that contributed to our record turnout of over 3 million. And it did something else. By having 1 million people vote early, it meant that 2 million people voted election day, which made the crowds a lot less, a lot easier to vote. So that was a good thing. The other thing I want to mention is, in addition to accessibility of the polls, is my record with regard to returning money to people victimized by financial fraud. We've had one of the most aggressive securities regulation operations in the country. We've literally returned, now it's up to tens of millions of dollars directly back into the pocket of those who've been defrauded. And that's tens of thousands of Massachusetts residents who receive the benefit of that. I'm very proud of that. I have an opponent. He keeps running around talking about, he was out in the Berkshires last week. He's a Boston City Councilor, so I guess it must have been an adventure for him to visit the Berkshires. But he went up and he told him he's going to set up an 800 number. Now, I wish I could tell you that I was the one that set up the 800 number for the Securities Division. No, it was my predecessor. So he's a little out of touch, but I suppose it's anything, say anything, because he has to create a rationale for himself. But I'm very proud of what we've been able to do to help people get their money back when they're defrauded. And I can produce those people because they're very grateful for what we were able to do for them. But I don't want to talk about the past, because good politics is never about the past, it's about the future. There's two things I'm really concerned about going forward, and that's what I really want to pursue, because that's why I'm seeking re-election more than any other. Number one is, we were not hacked. We were not the subject of hacking during the last election. We were officially informed of that, as a matter of fact, by the Homeland Security Department. One of the reasons is we're not on the internet. We have a very careful system, secure system on our registrations. But I'm not convinced that the efforts at hacking and interfering with elections are over. I'm not convinced that Trump and his allies, whether they're foreign or domestic or whatever, have suddenly decided they're just going to let everything happen. No, I don't think so. So I think it's extremely important to have somebody who knows something about elections running elections in Massachusetts. I'm proud about the fact that we've had the progress we've made in making it more accessible, but I'm equally proud about the fact we've had accountability for our elections. Those of you who are so involved in campaigns, you know how we vote here in Massachusetts. You've got a card, you can look at it, you can see who you voted for. If you're involved in it, you know the box counts it, but they can be hand counted. We recounts all the times, especially in towns. There's been accuracy and fairness and no fraud, and that's the way I want to keep it. You know, Trump was pronouncing in his fantasy that the reason he lost the popular vote was millions of illegal aliens had voted, supposedly. And then, in addition, he claimed that busloads of people from Massachusetts went to New Hampshire and voted in New Hampshire. That was his other claim. I disputed that. Then he set up this commission on fraud on elections. Well, the only fraud was the commission itself, because it had no statutory basis whatsoever. It was to pursue his fantasies. Well, we were all asked by this commission, headed by Pence, an independent source, of course, to send all our election records. Well, I refused. And fortunately, most secretaries of state had an opportunity to do the same thing, I must say, including some Republicans. Well, last week he folded shop on his fraud commission because it was a fraud. And I'm proud to have had a role in it. The reason he said is that he didn't get any cooperation. I'm very grateful that he didn't. Because I want to continue to pursue our elections to make sure they continue this way, especially to 2020. Because as important as 2018 is, 2020 is the ballgame. 2020 is the ballgame in another respect too. That is the United States Census. The census is going to be taken in March of 2020. And I have been the official designee for the census, not just in 2010, 2000. I am once again approved by everybody, Republicans, Democrats, everybody, to be the official liaison. And we've already begun working on it with the federal government to try to identify new construction and all the rest of it. Now, the census in Massachusetts has always been challenging for a couple of reasons. First of all, because we do have a large immigrant population, but also an extremely diverse immigrant population. Multiple languages, and getting folks who are not citizens to be counted here, which they should be because they're here, it's very difficult and challenging. But obviously, in light of the rhetoric and the activity of the Trump administration, it's going to be extremely difficult going forward in 2020. How do we go to somebody and say, we're here for the federal government, how many children do you have? I don't think they're going to respond if they're not a citizen, and that's a real concern. The other factor in Massachusetts has always been colleges. College students, like military personnel, should be counted where they spend most of the year, and for most of them it's here in Massachusetts. Getting that message across has always been, again, a challenge. Once again, the Trump administration has a new policy on having group quarters, so-called, that's dormitories, counted, where in previous years we could take a list. They don't want us to do that. So I begin to see a little strategy on the part of the Commerce Department, headed by Mr. Wilbur Ross. I think it is to make sure that states like Massachusetts get undercounted. And I think, of course, they wouldn't be terribly upset if we lost a congressional seat and lost an electoral vote. That wouldn't bother them at all. So I'm very determined to make sure we get a very accurate count in 2020. And I want to bring the expertise that I have in doing this. For those reasons and many others, I am seeking your support for re-nomination. I actually brought some of my nomination papers available. I'm sure you can put them out at your caucus. I talked to Jay Gonzalez. He says he's out getting signatures. I will tell you the caucuses are an excellent place to do it because it helps everybody. It helps the candidates, helps those who pursue signatures, and also it means you're getting good signatures and gets the process worked out. But most of all, I think we have a common mission. It's not just my re-election or other Democratic incumbents. It's the opportunity, once again, to reassert our message, which is so strong and so important and so needed. We cannot tolerate more years of this. It's going to do permanent damage to our people, their future, Social Security, all the things we care about, economic security. It is something that is extremely dangerous to other people, all the things that all of us have spent our lifetimes working to promote. The things that we have advanced, social justice, economic justice, fairness with the union, unionization. There are attacks on all of those things that have made our lives and the lives of the people we all represent, because you do represent all those people. You may be on a town committee or whatever, but you're a community person. You know what's going on there, and you know the effect of these policies is terrible and detrimental to us. So that's what's at stake. We have a lot to do, but looking around this room and seeing the enthusiasm, the confidence, we're going to be successful, and we're going to take back the Congress, and in 2020, we're going to take back the White House and our country.